What does it take to win an NBA championship?
They've done it! They win their first championship in franchise history!
Welcome to Building a Champion, a new podcast that takes an in-depth, inside look at what it takes to make it to the finals. Hosted by two-time NBA champion Dave Wohl, Building a Champion goes off the court and into the front office, talking with some of the biggest names in basketball. Exclusive interviews with the players, coaches, GMs, and scouts who took their teams all the way to the NBA championships and won. And now, here's your host for Building a Champion, Dave Wohl.
Welcome to the Building a Champion podcast. My guest today is Doc Rivers, the head coach of the LA Clippers. I'm your host, Dave Wohl, and he and I are going to talk about the Boston Celtics' great run to an NBA title in 2008. Doc, first thing I want to ask you is, when you left Orlando, you had other options before you agreed to coach the Celtics. You could have gone back to TV. There were other teams that started to call your agent. But Danny Ainge and the Celtic owners flew down to meet you in Orlando. So why the Celtics? Was part of your decision a desire to be part of that Celtic mystique?
Yeah, that was probably the only reason. If you remember, Dave, when I at that time, the Celtics were pretty bad and didn't look like they had a future. If you looked at their team construction. And I originally said no. You know, Danny and the owners came in and made a visit to my house, and we talked for a while. And when he left, I told Danny, I just don't think it's the right time. And then Danny left, and you know, the funniest story about the whole thing was about 2 days later, Danny called me back and said, "Hey, I'd like to just sit down and talk with you one more time." And I said, "Sure, where are you?" He said, "I'm out front," you know, and he walked back in with all the owners, you know, which I thought, you know, was pretty strong. You know, Danny, they walked back in and said, "Hey, we just want to talk to you again." And we talked. When he left, you know, just thinking about it more and more, I kept thinking it's the Boston Celtics. And I had made a comment that I was going to take a year off just to be with the family. Unless the Knicks, the Celtics, the Lakers, you know, you named all the big teams,
right,
came calling, and then I would have to think about it. And it was the Boston Celtics. So I jumped on.
You know, you and Danny had known each other as competitors when you competed against each other, but now you're in different roles. Did Danny have a vision for how the two of you could win a title?
Yeah, you know, in the first year, we just kind of played out the year. And we actually, and people forget, we actually won our division in our first year.
Right.
And I had that crazy series with Indiana that we ended up losing. And then after that, that summer, we sat down and we knew, listen, we're going nowhere. This team is going nowhere. It's not a very functional team. And we were going to strip it. We were going to try to keep Paul. That was the only thing we said. If we can keep Paul and try to build the team from there, let's see what we can do. And you know, listen, Danny and Drew and the whole staff, everybody, made great picks, you know, getting Al Jefferson, Rondo, Perk, Gerald Green. We start amassing assets. And, you know, unfortunately, while we were amassing assets, we were amassing a lot of losses as well. You know, I mean, we had an 18-game losing streak. People were calling for my head. People were calling for Danny's head. And what Danny did great, you know, because I don't care if you're rebuilding or not, I don't think that the two things people don't realize is everybody's competitive. And even though you know you're rebuilding, you still want to win. The second thing is that goes on your coaching record, you know, for your career. You know, it sticks. It doesn't go on the team's record. It goes on your coaching record.
Right.
And Danny would say that every day. He would walk in and say, "Hey, man, I apologize. Just hang in there. We're going to get this right. Just hang in there." And that really helped me. That helped me get through those tough times.
Well, I think the thing, as I was your assistant coach at the time, and the thing that impressed me over your time in Boston was the trust that developed between you and Danny. When you guys had a disagreement, the two of you just went behind closed doors. You talked out the disagreements. It never became public. It never became divisive. And that's, as you know, not often the NBA norm. Did that trust develop organically?
Yeah, it did. Because, you know, it's funny, as you said, we were competitors. But we really didn't know each other. I think the only time I had actually had a long conversation with Danny, other than, you know, when they came to hire me and on the phone, was when we were both on the All-Star team the same year. And we sat next to each other on the bus. I didn't even want to sit next to him. I didn't like him. because he was a competitor. And then we sat next to each other and realized, wow, we're very similar, and really hit it off. So it just grew. You know, it grew with he backed everything he said he was going to do in those first 3 years, and he kept supporting me. And he really supported me behind the scenes with the ownership, you know, because we have so many owners, as you know. There's 4 main ones, but there's a lot of others, and there's a lot of voices. Right. And, you know, when you're losing and you hear people criticizing you, the owners read that stuff and start believing it. Unfortunately, I had Danny to tell them, no, this guy can really coach. We just need to give him the material.
Well, I thought one of the most impressive things, and we'll get into some of the things that went on over those seasons, but, you know, you lose 18 games in a row in your third season. And then you finish the season, you lose 8 of 9. And literally, I think everybody in Boston wanted your head. The talk shows, the media, the fans, maybe your family even, you know. And certainly,
they probably wanted me to come home.
And certainly half the ownership, even though now they say they were fully behind you. And what Danny does all of a sudden is Danny just stands up and publicly says, enough, he's my coach. I think he's going to be a great coach. And everything stops. And one of the questions that you kind of answered was he giving you that support behind the scenes, which enabled you to kind of deal with all that stuff?
Yeah, it was really good. And going into that third year, he did something really interesting. We had our owners meeting where we golfed, and then we went in and had dinner at Turner Hill Golf Club outside of Boston. And we sat there, and we after the end of the dinner, Danny said, I want each owner to write on a piece of paper what do you think our record's going to be. And, you know, Dave, you remember that team. Right. We were going to be bad.
Very bad.
And I think the worst record was over 500 that one of the owners put. I mean, there were 49 and things, 47, 46. And Danny says, I'm reading these numbers. You guys have to be crazy. If we win 30 games, it would be a miracle. And I thought that was huge. I thought that was actually the turning point with the owners to understand what they were in for and exactly what we were trying to do.
Yeah, so he brought them back to reality in essence.
Yeah. Well, we think he did.
Yeah. Hey, one of the things I thought that was really impressive too was you get up to Boston, and there's a lot of ex-Boston championship players that still live in the area, come to a lot of games, Cousy, Satch Sanders, Havlicek, you know, et cetera. And Tommy Heinsohn obviously does the color for the games. And the previous coach, Rick Pitino, had kind of kept them at arm's length. But you invited them all back to practices, to games, and made them feel welcome. What went into that decision for you?
Well, I thought that I could use the tradition of the Boston Celtics to help us win. And so the first year there, I wrote every single ex-Celtics player. I don't care if they played a year. If they had to play a year more. And I made sure that we contacted every single one of them from the history of the start of the Celtics who were still living. And it's amazing, Dave, the return I got. I mean, I was getting messages from all of them, Satch and Bob, and they start coming back. You remember they would come on the road. You know, it was just a really cool thing. And, you know, when we start winning, they're different than any other organization. You know, you feel sometimes players from the past who've had some success with the organization, they want you to win, but kind of not really, because you may take away, you know, their accomplishment or their steam. And it's so opposite when you are anointed a Celtic, and when they like buy into you, you're in, like you're in a club, and they don't care anything except for you winning. They want you to win. And you could feel that from all the ex-players.
Well, I want to relate a story to our listeners that really impressed me because our first 2 home games, I think, of your first season, Red Auerbach spoke pre-game one, and the second one you had Bill Russell come in. And, you know, Bill was telling this great story. He said he got introduced at a banquet, and the MC said, Bill Russell, who won 11 rings, you know, MVP, Hall of Fame, top 50 players. And Bill got up, and he's telling our players he thanked the MC for the introduction, but if the MC really wanted to honor him, he should have just introduced him as captain of the Celtics because that was his greatest honor. And I remember looking at our players and their jaws just dropped because it wasn't about him. It wasn't about his stats. All it was about was the winning tradition and playing with these guys who were his teammates.
And that was Red Auerbach. I think Red set that tone. I went on a golf one day with Casey Jones and Bob Cousy and Havlicek. And for 4.5 hours, all they talked about was Bill Russell. And I found that so interesting because a lot of times, guys want some, they want people to talk about them. And they put this guy on this statue and they just usually, you're around some of Michael Jordan's ex-teammates. They talk how great he was, but then they say all the things he wasn't.
Right.
Those three guys did none of that. It was all about the greatness of Bill Russell, the greatness of the team, how he's a team player, how Red rode him and stayed on him all the time. And it was just really impressive.
And the key, you mentioned something that's real key because I think we've seen this with other teams, Pop with Duncan, and I think as we'll get into you with KG and the willingness of a great player to allow himself to be coached is such a key.
It's the key. It's the key to winning. You're never going to win unless that the great player gives himself up to the team as well. I mean, you have to give up something. And when great players allow themselves to be coached and publicly coach, publicly criticize, it's important for the team because then all the other players have to go in line. They have to fall in line.
The first season you mentioned, we lose to Indiana in 7 games. We realize this roster is not a championship roster by any means, but it's your first year with Paul Pierce. And he struggled at times to play the way you wanted him to. Did you see him as a championship piece at that point?
I didn't know. I would probably say not sure, probably leaning more on the opposite side of that early on. But I give Paul credit. I mean, if you remember, I was hard on Paul.
Right.
I remember coming in, and I think Paul was shooting 40%. And I asked him, was he a great shooter? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, either you are not a great shooter or you're taking bad shots. And we have to move the ball. You have to move the ball and let the ball come back to you. And I guaranteed him that his efficiency would go up. And he bucked it. You remember the one game late in the game, we lost the game. I took him out and sat him the rest of the game.
Right.
And just refused to put him back in because he wasn't playing the way I needed him to play. And, for him, it's tough. He'd already made the All-Star team a couple times. Why would he change his game? And I was trying to get him to see it's not about you changing your game. It's you changing your game to become a winner.
Right.
And I give him credit that following year, if you remember, he came back and really late into that first year. He came back and said, listen, I hear what you're saying. I'm going to do it. And he didn't know if he wanted to trust it. He said, I'm going to do it and see where it goes. And fortunately for all of us, he came out playing great. I think he got up to 48% at one point during that season. And to me, that point on, he trusted anything and everything that we did.
Yeah, I thought that was a real turning point when he came back that second year. So, now you get to the end of the third year. It's your worst year of coaching by far. You end up winning 24 games. Danny stands up. But, at this point, are you and Danny feeling pressure from ownership? I mean, it's gone downhill from when you got there. There's no cavalry coming in sight. We're going to talk about the draft that summer in a minute. But are you feeling pressure, you and Danny, from ownership any further?
We're not feeling a lot, but there were some for sure. We knew that we could not endure another season like that.
Right.
And we had targeted that summer where we were going to jump in and make changes. So when the draft came, obviously, and we didn't get one of the first 2 picks, it turned out to be a blessing. But at the time, we were all really concerned.
The 2 prizes in the draft that summer for our listeners were Greg Oden and this long, skinny kid named Kevin Durant. And Memphis and Boston had the best odds to get those 2 picks. Do you remember which guy you were hoping to get if you ended up with a choice for either one?
I think Odom. I hate to say that, but I think, Danny swears he wanted KD, and I remember thinking Odom would be a game changer just with his size and his, the way he played in college. And fortunately, we didn't have that choice.
Now you're sitting there, you're watching the commissioner open those sealed envelopes. How are you feeling when you realize that, not only are we not getting 1 or 2, we're not getting 3, 4, we finally, get 5?
We kind of talked about our next plans, and we knew we had already targeted Kevin. And we knew that we felt strongly that if we gave Minnesota the package of our picks and some of our players, we can get Kevin Garnett. So I felt good about that. That was already in plan. And what, if you remember, Dave, we actually had a deal where Minnesota agreed to it, and Kevin had a no trade and said no. People don't remember that Kevin Garnett said no to the Celtics at first. And that triggered the other move where we traded the pick and ended up getting Ray Allen. So now we're sitting there the day after the draft with Ray Allen, Paul Pierce, Rondo, and we get this call from Kevin McHale saying now Kevin Garnett wants to come. And we were laughing, if you remember, because we were like, well, we just gave away all our assets. So I don't know how we're going to make this work. And fortunately for us, Kevin McHale was in love with Al Jefferson.
Right.
And he just wanted, and he said it publicly, I want the best young big man in the NBA. And at that time, it was Al. You guys have to figure out how to make the rest of the numbers work. And I can't even remember, you probably know this more than me, it felt like we traded like 9 guys for Kevin, but I can't remember how many guys. I know Gerald Green, Sebastian, Ryan Gomes. There was a lot of players that went in that deal.
Well, here's something, and I don't know if you remember this, you might not, but Danny and Kevin are negotiating, okay? And Danny ultimately gave Kevin 2 deals. He could choose one or the other, and Al was in both deals. But one of the deals had Rondo in it, and one didn't. And the funny thing was, after Danny told us, hey, I've made him 2 deals, he's going to tell us tomorrow which deal he's taken, and he told us what the final deals were. And all of a sudden we started talking. The front office like, we can't lose Rondo. What are we going to do if we? And all of a sudden we realized that we didn't want to lose Rondo because we didn't have another point guard. We really thought a lot of things about him. So we were all sweating that night that Kevin would take the Rondo deal, and luckily the next day he doesn't. And the thing is with Rondo, it was interesting because he really tested your player management skills, didn't he? I mean, he couldn't shoot. He struggled to finish at the rim. Poor foul shooter, but you saw something special in him. What was it?
His vision and his competitiveness. I looked at Rondo, hard to coach at times, very difficult, because he challenged you. He was very smart. Like, I don't think I haven't coached anyone smarter than Rondo. He was prepared. And I thought on a championship team, that's the type of guy that you needed. The problem was the shooting. And the free throw shooting is tough. They have a point guard on the floor that doesn't shoot well, especially free throws at the end of a game. And we had to be creative, if you remember, using Rondo throughout that year, especially down the stretch. We would take him off the ball and things like that. But at the end of the day, I just saw his ability to pass and make people better. And I thought with Ray Allen on our team, we would need that.
Coming up next on Building a Champion.
Doc, I want you to tell your story of the money in the ceiling in L.A.
I walk in the locker room. I asked each player for $100. And I said, now you guys have to go in the shower. So we found this patch above one of the lockers that no one would ever go in here. I grabbed the money and I put it up in the ceiling.
We'll be back with more Building a Champion after this short break.
Welcome to another edition of Game Changers, a look at the pivotal events and decisions that changed the game of basketball to what it is today. Brought to you by the Building a Champion podcast. Today's game changer, the 24-second shot clock.
Shot clock winding down. Curry's going to have to put it up, launches it up, shot clock. Oh, he knocks it down! Steph Curry with the shot clock expiring.
In 1950, the Fort Wayne Pistons and the Minneapolis Lakers played to a final score of 19-18. Rochester and Indianapolis played a 6 overtime game with an average of 2 shots per overtime. Boring. NBA fans were staying away in droves. And by 1953, the league was down to just 9 teams. Something had to be done. The answer? The 24-second shot clock. Why 24 seconds? An NBA game is 2,880 seconds long. 120 shots per game works out to 1 every 24 seconds. Simple math. The idea was adopted in 1954, and instantly, the games were more exciting and attendance skyrocketed. Today, the NBA has 30 teams, and average attendance is nearly 20,000 per game. In other words, the shot clock saved the NBA.
Thanks for listening to another edition of Game Changers. And now, back to Building a Champion.
This is Building a Champion, the podcast that's all about what happens off the court and behind the scenes that results in a championship team on the court. I'm your host, Dave Wohl, and I'm talking with LA Clippers head coach Doc Rivers. Doc, the trade's done. You now have the big three, and you got them together for their first meeting with you. What was that first interaction between them like?
Well, the first meeting was at the arena. We had a great meeting. We sat down in my office, and we just talked for a little bit about winning. And I looked across. I said, okay, now we've gotten all the nice stuff out of the way. I said, Ray, what are you going to give up? Kevin, what are you going to give up? Paul, what are you willing to give up? And they looked at me like, what are you talking about, give up? We just put us three together. We don't have to give up anything. And I said, oh, no, you guys are going to have to give up shots, probably 10 each. And the room was like, you could hear a pin drop. And they were looking around, and I said, yeah. And I said it again. I said, each guy probably is going to have to give up 10 shots that he took last year. And all of a sudden, Kevin says, I'm in. You can have them all. If that's what we need to do to win, he said, I give all my shots to Paul and Ray. And I said, well, that doesn't work, Kevin. I just need you to give up some of them. And I need all you guys to give up. And then Paul and Ray said, whatever it takes. And then I said, okay, second step, defense. We cannot win if you guys don't play defense. And so that was interesting. I thought it was Ray who said, I don't think people think I'm a defensive player. I don't think people think I can play defense. And I want to prove to people that I can. And Paul said, I know I can. And then Kevin said, I'm the captain of the defensive team. Both of you guys will be playing defense this year. I can guarantee you that. And I thought that comment was great.
These three guys were each used to being the alpha dogs, as you found out in that meeting when you started to talk about sacrifice. But did you get a sense after that meeting that they would get along, that it wasn't just going to be, yeah, I'll do this, but I'm not really going to do it, that they would sacrifice individually to chase a ring?
Yeah, I did. I felt good after that meeting because even though Paul was the guy that had been there, I think walking out of that meeting, I remember writing a note, Kevin Garnett is the leader of our team. And it was clear in that meeting, just with the way he carried himself, the way he spoke to Ray and Paul. And then the next thing is I got to make sure that they're willing to follow. And they did. But it was clear in that meeting, all three were going to lead, and Ray led, and so did Paul. But Kevin was the leader. And they were great in assisting his leadership.
You now have the big three. But now you got to fill out the rest of your roster. And James Posey became one of the key veterans that was signed. What kind of players were you looking for to fill out the rest of your team? You knew you probably had Rondo and Perkins slated in to start as the part of the five. But what kind of players were you looking for to fill out the bench?
Tough-minded veterans who were skilled. James Posey could shoot the three, very tough, great leader in his own right. I had won a title. Eddie House, another little tough-minded guard that could shoot the ball. Later P.J. Brown. We added so many good pieces to that team. I thought what got lost in what Danny did, getting Kevin and Ray was one thing, but I thought what Danny did was filled out the roster and some with minimum salaries. And I thought he did an amazing job there.
And the other thing is, I think he got guys that all bought into the team aspect, not the individual agenda. And I thought there was one key thing that you did that bound your team together right away, and that was the concept of Ubuntu. I know you had been searching when I'd been your assistant coach, even going back to Orlando. You'd been searching for years for a symbol, an emblem, a flag, or something, but nothing really resonated for you as the right choice. Why did Ubuntu click?
It came out of nowhere. I was, a trustee at Marquette University, and I was sitting in one of our board meetings. I think we were talking about public safety or something at the time. So I was completely bored. And then we took a break. And one of the other board members grabbed me and said, "Hey, I need to talk to you about something." And I said, "Okay." And she says, "Have you ever heard of Ubuntu?" And I was like, "No." And she said, "I was just reading about your team that you assembled. Your team needs Ubuntu." And I said, I hear you, but I have no idea what that is or what it is. She says, "I'm going to leave it up to you to go research it and find out about it. And then when you do, call me and we'll talk about it." And that night I go home, I'll go back to my hotel room in Milwaukee, and I get on my computer and I look up Ubuntu. And Dave, I bet I was reading about that. I'm not exaggerating. Maybe 7 hours that night. I don't know if I went to sleep. I was up all night, and it just hit me. A person is a person through other people. I can't be all I can be unless you are all you can be. And one of the things that I loved about it is one of the things it said, and it's not a word, it's a way of life. But the theme of you can never be threatened by another person's good or what they're doing successful. Right. You can never have jealousy. You have to celebrate their success because their success is part of your success. And I was like, wow, if this is not our team right now. And so when I got back to Boston, I couldn't wait to introduce it to the team. And I thought we did it the perfect way. I called the rookies in, and one of the rookies was Big Baby, if you remember. Right. And I said, "Hey, tomorrow, before our first practice, you guys are going to do a presentation on this word Ubuntu." And they looked at me like I looked when I first heard it. And I sat with them. I went over it. I highlighted areas that they should do it. Now, that next day, I didn't know if it was going to be good or bad or how they were going to present it. But Big Baby, and I can't remember who else, they wasn't good. They were phenomenal. They took it. I think it hit them like it hit me, that word. And they sold it. They talked about it. And when we got to the huddle, for the first two huddles, everybody was like 1, 2, 3 Celtics. And all of a sudden, we get to the huddle, and Kevin Garnett said, "Ubuntu on 3." And from that point on, it was in us.
Yeah, and it went viral, Doc. I mean, it was on T-shirts, it was on books, it was on, it was on coffee cups. It just really took off, and I thought it just bound that team together right away.
Yeah, it really did. We were getting stuff like I have statues and stuff from kids in Africa who were sending stuff from Ubuntu. So it really did hit on.
Danny as the GM now gets you the elite talent. Does the pressure now shift to you as the coach to now produce? I mean, this is Boston, and with the acquisition of Garnett and Ray, the expectations were sky high. And what I thought was really funny was everyone who had wanted to run you out of town the year before was now jumping on the bandwagon. Plus, you knew that you had a short window with the big three because of age.
Yeah, we did. And that was my first challenge. It's funny, and maybe I was naive or whatever, but I never looked at it as a lot of pressure. I looked at it as a great opportunity. And so I felt the need to make sure our team understood that we don't have a big window. Because when we put the team together, I don't remember one person picking us to win it that year. Everyone thought it would take a year to get the talent together and figure it out, and then the next year we would win it. And I remember early on telling our guys, there is no next year. There's no guarantees to next year. If we're going to win it, it's going to be this year. And I kept telling our guys that we are going to win the title this year. And I never relented from that. They heard it so many times, and I kept almost guaranteeing that we're going to win the title this year. And I thought by mid-season, because we got off to an amazing start, when they believed it, we became an unstoppable force.
You know, one of your key signings that summer had nothing to do with players. It was signing Tom Thibodeau as your defensive coordinator. Now, you know, what made you settle on Tom?
Same lineage. You know, we were under Jeff Van Gundy, really Pat Riley, Dick Harder. We had all come from that. You know, that was who I played for and who I tried to design my defense around. And I was looking for someone who could do it and who knew exactly what I knew and felt the way I felt about defense. What's crazy about that was I went after Tom. Tom had a choice between signing with me or I don't know who the coach was in Washington, but with the Washington Wizards. And so before we made that trade, Tom, you know, started leaning towards Washington. We were about to make the trade, and he goes to Washington. He was there for one day, and he gives me a call and said, "Oh my goodness, I got to get out of here. I don't like this setup here." And I said, "Well, Tom, you just signed a contract." He said, "You got to help me get out of this contract." And you know, which is really unheard of. But basically, Tom voiced his unhappiness and said he wanted to leave. And we were lucky. They let him go. And that's how we got Tibbs.
You know, you get off to a phenomenal start that season, as you mentioned, 18-2 out of the gate, 33-7 at the midpoint. Did that surprise you, considering how many of the players had never played with each other before? Because it was essentially almost a whole new team.
You know, I don't know if it surprised me or not. I just know this. I remember our first exhibition game against Toronto in Rome. And I remember in the third quarter, I turned to Thibodeau and said, "We're going to be hard to beat." And I said, "We're really good." And Tibbs says, "What do you mean?" I said, "No, we're championship good. We're really good." And you can just see it on the floor. So you felt that, but I didn't know if we would get off to a great start or not. I didn't even know how our record would look. I just knew we'd be really good by the end of the year.
You know, you end up winning 66 games that year, an unbelievable 44-game turnaround from the year before. There's two young, unproven starters on that team, Rondo and Perkins. Perk became a terrific defender, certainly helped by Garnett. How was your relationship with Rondo growing that season, and how did the big three look at him?
Rondo that year was great. I mean, it was easy. He was so, you know, he knew that he was the point guard of a great team, but he also knew that he hadn't made it himself. He knew that he had to, you know, fall in line with the big three, and he did all that. And Rondo and Ray, I mean, Rondo made Ray really good, and he made Paul good. He made Kevin good. It took them a little bit, but once they got to liking him, they loved him. They loved him on the floor.
KG was unique. I don't know that there's another word for him, but I want you to tell our listeners the story that you told me of trying to get KG to sub out in a practice one time.
Yeah, KG was great to coach, but he was tough at times because he had this thing about a warrior. You know, he always talked about being a warrior, warrior's mentality. And so, like mid-season, I noticed that Kevin Garnett had not been out of a practice. And when I say out of a practice, I mean, not only did he practice, he never came out. He never sat doing practice. And so I started getting concerned, you know, because we had hard practices, if you remember, Dave, that year. And, you know, I didn't need Kevin on the floor the whole time in practice, so I tried to take him out once. And I remember for the first part of it, I told Perk or someone to go get Kevin. They said, "No, I'm good." And I said, no, go get Kevin. And he was like, no, he's nuts. I'm not going to go try to take him out. And so I finally blow to Wilson and said, "Kevin, sit." And I don't know who I put in, PJ Brown or somebody. And Kevin's yelling at me about being a warrior, and warriors don't sit down. And he goes on and on. And so I'm like, "All right, great, you're a warrior. But the warrior needs a rest right now, and he's going to sit down." So we start practice back, and I look on the sideline, and Kevin is running the floor, mocking whatever the guy that is in his place is doing. So if the guy would run down the floor and jump, Kevin would jump. He was sliding, Kevin would slide. If he got a rebound, Kevin would jump up and get the rebound. I blew the whistle, and I called practice. I said, "Practice is over." And everybody's like, "What?" I said, Kevin won't sit down. And I said, Kevin's over there mocking the guy on the floor. I'm trying to give him rest so practice is over. And everybody got mad at Kevin. And so Kevin, then had to adhere to sitting down for at least 5 minutes per practice. And that was our deal afterwards.
It's funny because usually it's the opposite. It's the coach trying to get his best player to play hard in practice. So
yeah, it's exact opposite. Kevin he was built differently. He was a go guy. He was extremely competitive, and he always felt like everything was about the leadership part of it, to show his guys that he was willing to do whatever it took and whatever they had to do. And I thought it was great leadership.
Be sure to check out more Building a Champion podcast episodes where Dave talks with GM of the Houston Rockets, Daryl Morey.
I don't know if your listeners know that my first NBA job was working with Dave.
NBA legend Jerry West.
It was enough, and this gigantic person filled the door of Shaquille O'Neal.
Former GM of the Cavaliers, David Griffin.
I got there in September, and LeBron had left in July, and it was like jumping in a burning building.
And many more who give you the inside story on what it takes to win the NBA Finals.
I remember our first exhibition game, and I said, we're really good. We're championship good.
And now, back to Building a Champion.
Doc, in the first round now, the playoffs come, and you beat a young athletic Hawks team with Josh Smith, Joe Johnson, Al Horford in the first round, but it goes 7 games. Looking back, do you think that tough 7-game series helped your team get focused right away in the playoffs? Did you have any concern about, lack of playoff experience going in with your group in terms of playing together?
It's funny. I didn't have concern about lack of playoff experience. I had concern about we hadn't been tested all year. The season, we won 66 games. We hadn't lost 2 games in a row the entire season. The season was too easy. And I actually said that before the first game in the Atlanta series. Someone asked me, what's my concern going to a playoff? I said, I have no idea how we're going to respond when we're tested, because we haven't been tested this year. And so I thought that series was the most important part of the entire journey.
Now you get Cleveland and 23-year-old LeBron in the second round, and Ray Allen goes into a huge shooting slump. He shot 4 for 24 from 3, but you get to that 7th game, and Paul Pierce brings it home. He and LeBron have this incredible shootout. Paul scores 41 to LeBron's 45, and again, the home court helps you and pays off. What do you remember about that shootout in that game?
It's rare that you're in a game from a coaching standpoint, as you know, and you can actually say it during the game, and this is an amazing game. You're usually so much into it, but it was really those two guys were playing so well at such a high level. It was an amazing thing to witness. And what I remember most about that game is what it came down to, in my opinion, was a jump ball. The fundamental jump ball where you're supposed to box out, and LeBron didn't, and Paul dove in front of him and got the ball on the floor. And to me, that saved the game for us. But it's funny. They always say things come down to fundamentals. That game came down to fundamentally making the right plays.
Yeah, and to me, in a lot of ways, it showed so much growth in Paul under you from the first year you had him. It was just more about doing all the little things the right way, sacrifice and everything, that I just thought it showed how your relationship with him had really helped change him and helped him grow.
Yeah, I would agree. And he did a lot of little things by that time. You remember the game-winning shot, or one of the big shots, was made by P.J. Brown.
Right.
But it's funny when you watch it on film. Paul drives, throws it to Eddie House. Eddie House, who never passed, then throws it to P.J. Brown, and it was the right play. And P.J. made the shot. It's like the basketball gods were rewarding us for playing right.
You go now into the semifinals against a very good Detroit team, Rasheed Wallace, Chauncey Billups, Rip Hamilton, Tayshaun Prince. Another tough series, but Ray Allen finds his touch from 3 again, and you win it in 6 games. This is the first time you've gotten to the finals as a coach or a player. What were your feelings at the time?
It's funny, Dave. I didn't feel that excited because, it wasn't my goal. My goal was not to get to the finals. My goal was to win the finals. And So if you remember, like I didn't even get on the stage for the conference championship trophy presentation. Now I kind of stood off to the side. After we walked in the locker room, I walked right in and guys are celebrating. I said, I'm sure everybody's happy, but a silver ball is not in my dreams, only the gold ball. And I said, so, be happy, but this is not what we want. We go in and I remember, the media stuff, and they made us take these pictures with the trophy, and they wanted me to hold it, the championship trophy. And I refused to. I said, I'm not touching that thing. And there's a picture of me standing right next to it with my arms spread, but not touching it. And, I actually have that picture. I just didn't want to touch it. I don't know why. I felt like the only way you should be allowed to touch that championship trophy is by winning the championship. So I think that was my focus, that I didn't have enough time to be excited that we are in the final.
So now you're going into finals. You're going to be matched up against the Lakers in one of the most historic playoff rivalries probably in any sport. You are always great at little motivational things, and I want you to tell our listeners about the story of the money in the ceiling in L.A.
Yeah, we played in L.A. During the regular season, and we lost that game. And I remember, our guys were a little down, and I remember walking to the locker room, and some things just come to you, if you know what I'm saying. And I thought about it, and I said, you know what? I walk in the locker room. I asked each player for $100, and everybody was reaching in, grabbing $100. I made the trainer Eddie Lacerte give me $100. Vlad, everyone had to give up $100. Even Phil Lynch and Johnny Joe, our equipment manager, they handed me the $100, and I said, now you guys have to go in the shower, all of you. Until I call you out. And they were like, what? I said, I need you to leave the locker room. And I made Phil Lynch guard the door so no one could come in. And Kevin Eastman, I needed one coach. And I grabbed Kevin, and Kevin didn't know what I was up to either. Kevin said, what's going on? I said, I want to hide this money somewhere in this. And Dave, it took us 10 minutes. We couldn't find, every time we looked through a panel, there was like something that we felt like security or maintenance would find.
And this was in the locker room, yeah.
This is inside the locker room. So we finally found this patch above one of the lockers that was, you could tell no one would ever go in here. I grabbed the money and I put it up there. And when I told the players to come back in, I said, all right, guys, the money's gone. It's here. It's hidden in the ceiling. And if you want it back, you have to come back here to play in the finals. And they lit up. I mean, it's amazing. Like, they were all for it. They were so fired up. And what I remember most about the finals, other than winning it, was when we got to L.A. We pull into the arena, and the players get off the bus, and they sprinted to the locker room. I mean, they were all sprinting. And me and Kevin walked because we were like, they will never find it. And so we just kind of calmly walked in the locker room. You can see they're tearing the place up, trying to find the money. And I walk up with a broomstick, punch the hole, and the money comes falling out. And they went diving on the floor, trying to grab their money back. And it was a pretty good moment for our team.
Oh, it was a great story. So now you're in the finals. And really in this series overall, you guys continued to be a great defensive team. And LA had trouble for most of the series finding a second or third scorer who could give Kobe any help on offense. But Danny's bench came through. Posey had a good game. Eddie House had a game. And Leon Powe came up with a solid scoring game in game 2 that helped you win the series. And Leon had just an interesting life story.
Yeah, Leon's story, homeless, sleeping in the car, and ends up going to University of California and now playing in the NBA. That's pretty impressive. Just an impressive story. One of the classiest, greatest kids you could ever coach, and one of the toughest. And I thought he fit our team toughness, another draft pick. When you looked at him and Big Baby, they kind of played off each other. One would play for a while, then the other one. There was always a competition going on our team. Tony Allen, who was maybe one of the greatest defenders of our era. was doing the same thing. So we had a bunch of just tough-minded defensive guys, and Leon Story was like wrote the story about our team.
Yeah, plus he went through 2 ACL operations. In addition,
he had no ACL, which is amazing that he played in the NBA with no ACLs, which I still don't understand how that's possible. But Leon did that, and you remember that game, that whole series. I mean, game 1 and 2 were good, but the biggest game was the game we were down 24 points,
right,
and came back. That's where that series changed, and it was a remarkable comeback. But the only way that happens is by a tough-minded group, and we had a tough-minded group.
You go back home, you're up 3-2, and with the new kind of format, you have 2 games to win it all. You get 2 games to win Banner 17. What are your thoughts at that time?
Well, I believe we're going to win Game 6. If you remember, we had some travel problems.
Right.
Our planes were grounded in L.A. as we watched the Lakers take off on their normal set time. All of a sudden, our windshield was cracked on the plane, so we had to get off that plane. We had to kick all the wives and family off the other plane. We got on that plane, and we sit there for an hour and a half, and then they said that plane broke. So now we knew this was the Lakers at play. At least that's what we believe, because there's no way this is happening. And I think we got in at 1 a.m. that morning, or 2 a.m. that morning of the game. We didn't have shoot-around, and we met at the arena. And I remember walking into practice, and, I've heard the players talk about this since. I walk into the game, and before Game 6, I said, guys, we're going to be champions tonight, and we're not just going to win tonight. We're going to win big. We're going to win big. This will be a blowout tonight. I want you to get that in your head. This will not be a close game tonight. And we went out on the floor. I don't even know what we won by, but it was huge. But I thought we set the tone by getting them to believe in winning big instead of winning the game. I didn't want them thinking about winning the championship. I wanted them to think about winning big. I thought that was important to set that tone.
Well, you actually get off to a 58-35 lead at the half. You're up 23 points, so you're pretty much being a good prophet. And then in the second half, you blow it open and you end up winning by 39 points, a complete rout. But you and I both know coaches are notorious when they get a big lead. They're really worried that a team can come back on them. You're trying to not let your players get complacent with a big lead. But at what point in that game do you remember thinking that you're going to win the title and hang another Celtic banner in the Garden and that you're going to win your first ring?
Probably way too late. I remember, I think at the time we were up like 44 with like 3 minutes left or 4 minutes left, and I have all the starters in. And Tip of everyone who probably is the king of keeping everybody in walks up to me and says, Coach, I think we could probably sub now. We're going to win this game. And I looked at him and started laughing and said, is Kobe off the floor? He said, no. I said, when Kobe goes off the floor, we go off the floor. And then Phil takes Kobe off, and then I take all our guys out. And at that moment, I remember, man, this is my life ago. Like all my life, I've wanted to be a champion. My goal in life, I pray every night, and I say, I want to win the NBA championship, and I'm about to do it. And that's when it hit home to me.
Well, what's interesting, a lot of players, coaches come in the league and they think, getting a ring is sort of easy. It just takes a few years. It took you 22 years since you came in the league as a player to get a ring. Did you ever think it was going to be this hard or you might not get one?
No, I never thought it'd be this hard. But I tell you what, and you know this from winning, after you win it, the first thing you realize is winning is hard. It's hard to win a title. It takes everything. When you read those quotes, it takes everything. It literally takes it's exhausting mentally, physically. You need some luck. You need your entire team to buy in. It is really difficult to win an NBA title, and it should never be taken for granted.
The last thing I want to touch on, Doc, before I let you go was you win the title, and you have to be looking at the next year or two and thinking we're pretty set up to maybe go on a little run here over the next 2 years. And then, of course, the injury to Garnett in 2009. 2010, the defense was still good, but you struggled on offense. How disappointing were the endings to those 2 years for you, just due to some circumstances beyond your control?
2009 wasn't because we didn't have Kevin. Like, he didn't play the rest of the year. The fact that we got one game from the Eastern Finals just tells you how competitive of a group that we had. 2010 was crushing because, we didn't have a great year. Again, Kevin was injured. Guys were injured. I don't know what seed we were. I want to say we were the 4th or 5th seed. But then we make it to the finals, get to a game 6, win it.
Right.
But then we lose Perkins. You remember Kendrick Carriers' ACL. And that was a huge blow for us. I still believe to this day, if Perk is healthy, we win Game 7 and we win 2 titles. So that's the one that got away as far as I'm concerned.
Right. You have been listening to Building a Championship podcast, and with my guest today, Doc Rivers, head coach of the LA Clippers. I'm Dave Wohl, your host. And Doc, thanks for spending time with us today.
Oh, Dave, thanks. This is a good subject. I'll talk about this any day.